Hey guys, what you're looking at is the old iconic steeple from the North Church in downtown Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Literally the heart of the city. That old steeple up there, it's hard to imagine looking across the skyline of the city and not seeing that steeple. Oddly enough, it's not the first church that's actually stood here. The old church was built in the late 17th century and stood here right up until the 1840s, believe it or not. And believe it or not, they had a steeple just as tall as this one here, about 168 feet tall. Back when the old church needed to be replaced in the 1840s, it was decided the safest way to knock down that steeple would be to drop the steeple, collapse it. And so they got some workers from the Navy Yard to come in and measure where they thought the steeple would land, and they made a toe mark right there across the street, and they said it'll land right there. And when they dropped it, sure enough, it landed right where the toe mark was. Pretty cool job. Anyway, the weather vane at the very top is the only part of the original church that still exists. They saved it and they reinstalled it on the new steeple when they had the chance and the new building was up. Even the bell was new in the 1853 as well. The original bell from the 18th century was sent off to England to be recast. Unfortunately, that ship sank and it took the bell with it. And so the church had to buy a brand new bell for this building, for the 1853 building. By 1854, the church was up and running and people were using it, and they use it to this day. Even though it looks like a big church, believe it or not, on the inside it's not that big. It's kind of small, mostly because the frame has to support a huge roof and that enormously tall steeple up there. If you look just to the right over here, you can see that over there is where the old Portsmouth State House used to be. There's not much left of it now, and of course you see Pleasant Street and all. But believe it or not, the State House was an important building as well. It's long gone now, but that State House, when it stood there, was incredibly important. That's where the residents of Portsmouth heard the Declaration of Independence read to them. That's where the residents heard that the Constitution had been ratified. That's where the royal governor made proclamations from the balconies. It was an incredibly important building. Funny story, by the 1830s, that old building was falling apart too, and they didn't know what to do with it. The city wanted to get rid of it, but people had a soft spot in their heart for the old State House, so they decided that they were going to sell it. And two bidders bid $12 each, and they couldn't decide who wanted what, so they decided to cut the building in half. And one person wound up with the north half, one wound up with the south half. The northern half has been lost to history. We don't know what happened to it. The southern half, however, became an apartment house for a long time, and in the 1960s it was decided to disassemble the old State House and put it away, put it in a trailer until they could decide what to do with it. In the early 2000s, there was even talk of opening that trailer and reassembling that old State House and maybe rebuilding the old State House somewhere in Portsmouth. That idea never really happened. As a matter of fact, the poor old southern end of the State House got kicked out of the parking lot it was staying in inside that trailer because the owner wanted to develop the land. The state of New Hampshire eventually allowed that trailer to be moved up to Concord. And to this day, that's where the southern end of the old State House is, in pieces, inside a tractor-trailer, sitting in a parking lot up in Concord someplace. But can you imagine the look, the old church next to the old State House? It must have been a beautiful sight. Anyway, thanks for checking in.